So yes, as we were mentioning, they didn't run an episode on 9/11. They didn't run an episode the week before on September 4th. So they were to come back on the 18th if they found funding, which they did. We mentioned at the end of the last episode that TNA ran into Dixie, who was their publicist, and she was just like, hey, my daddy has lots of money. Maybe he'll buy the company. So they spent most of the month of September negotiating that deal. It still wasn't even signed by the end of September. So that tells you like how long and arduous the process was. On September 3rd, they all went down to Dixie's house and office in
Dixieland.
Yes, literal Dixieland, the Panda Energy offices in Texas.
What about Surge Land, huh?
Yeah, I was actually surprised that like Dixie's already married to Surge at this stage. They're already the couple.
I like Surge and Dixie. I don't know, man.
We'll be seeing Surge a lot on TV. He's responsible for a lot of the banger theme songs we'll be talking about. He performs on some of those.
I appreciate. What does Surge do
In TNA?
in life? Like, what was his job?
I have no idea. He is a musician, but I don't know what he does as a job.
Was he successful at music, and that's why he was like chosen for this round? Or I assume he was chosen because it was Dixie's husband.
Yes.
Like, did he have like a history in it, or was he? I don't know. We'll do a Surge retrospect. Surge, come on the podcast. Be our fifth guest.
Chad and Surge. They can come on together. They can talk to each other.
Yeah, we'll rehash memories of NWA-TNA episode 12 and 13. Wait, 13 and 14. Wait, whatever.
So they went down to the Panda Energy offices in Texas. They talked to Bob Carter, Janice Carter, who is Dixie's mom, Todd, who's Dixie's brother, Dixie, and her husband Serge, and all of the people, the marketing director, the corporate attorney, CFO, human resources director. They sat down. They had a meeting in the offices where they mostly talked about like wrestling in general, introducing them to like the broader concept of wrestling, to their history in wrestling. They talked a lot about Jeff and Jerry in particular's history of wrestling, because Jerry would have worked a lot with Vince McMahon. And it's actually interesting to read Jerry's book where he's just like, I'm actually quite worried that they didn't talk about our presentation. I was annoyed that we didn't get to our presentation as fast as we did. We were talking about all these other things. It threw me for a loop.
He was ready for like an actual business meeting and not. So here's what wrestling is.
Yeah, it's like, so tell us about Vince. What's Vince really like? You worked for Vince.
Was Dixie a wrestling fan?
Like she says she was, that she grew up and she saw like bits and bobs of it, and basically I think it goes back a lot to the same thing that we were talking about with Richard Scrushy, where he was just like, I like Jeff Jarrett. Like Dixie liked and knew Jeff Jarrett. They lived in the same apartment complex. They ran into each other. They then hired Dixie as years later as the PR for Impact TNA. And she's just, and they probably saw the opportunity. It's like, well, if we do have a successful wrestling company, AEW, if you look at the moment, are firing on all cylinders, selling out 10,000 seat buildings, have huge TV deals. Like, wrestling can be a lucrative business if you get it right. It's just so many people don't get it right.
I think we mentioned that like Bob was a fan at some point too.
Yeah. So he's in the wrestling business, and he did say that Jeff and Jerry, based on this product, the wrestling business. I'm like, dubious, but
do you think the Jarretts, after like they got all this done and signed and whatever, were like, these fucking idiots? Look at we got them wrapped around our finger. They're gonna dump all this money into TNA. We got them. Like, do you think that was the attitude coming out of it, or like, thank fucking Christ, we've made it?
I think it's more of the latter, and I think it's more like Panda took a lot of the debt off of the heads of the Jarretts, and I think at this stage that's what they were
Personal
worried about.
debt too, right?
There was like 1.6 million that they would have been liable for to Health South that ends up getting written off in the negotiations of this deal. That I think they're a great deal relieved that they're not liable for that debt anymore. I think that's like the stage that we're reaching here. It's like, there's a lot of money that's going to come down on us if this actually fails, and obviously we can declare bankrupt, but they no longer became liable for a lot of that debt. It either got written off or renegotiated in the process of dealing with both Panda and Health South, because Health South were a shareholder and had a lot of money in the company, and so a lot of the negotiations were basically Panda playing hardball with Health South, where this like, you invested that 1.5 million or 1.1, and there was a 400,000 letter of credit as well, which they did keep on. They were responsible for the letter of credit after that. But the 1.1 million that Health South put in, that they were like, hey, we want our money back. Panda are just like, nah, you put that in knowing the risk. You should take the loss. And they did end up taking the loss. It ended up, the way they negotiated it was basically Panda would buy the company, they would fund the tapings, but they would also get 51% majority share in the company. So then that would leave the Jarretts with 49%. And then the Jarretts had to tie up a bunch of loose ends by giving Health South 5% of their cut in exchange for the debt that they had, and giving 5% to their lawyer as well, because she threw a fit and was very upset that Panda basically wanted to cut ties with everybody the Jarretts were working with, because Panda were like, oh, your accountants, your lawyers, all of that gone, we'll deal with that from now on.
But to be fair to Big Bob over here, TNA had at this point shown a weakness in that aspect of their production. You know, their behind the scenes characters being involved in things that, you know, ended in lawsuits multiple times.
Yep. TNA is a company that is less than 3 months old and is already involved in, I believe, at least 3 lawsuits.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, I can understand Panda coming in here and being like, yeah, you guys clearly can't handle this because you're fucking it up at every turn, so we'll take over that part of it too.
You guys take the wrestling, we'll take everything else, which is basically what it came down to.
Which is honestly what the money should probably do, you know? Like, I don't think Bushi Road was, like, coming into New Japan and being like, alright, guys.
Geto, you're in charge of legal. Jado, you're in charge of marketing.
Dick Togo, come over here and you'll be in charge of human relations. Let's go.
Yeah, we're gonna put Toriano in charge of accounting.
Yeah, like, Goto, you're the lawyer now. I think they came in with like, hey, you know, we have all the money and the history and the thing. We have a whole infrastructure. That's the word I'm looking for. We're going to do this right, and you just handle the silly slap fights.
So that meeting on September 3rd where they went down to Texas, it seemed to end well. Like Bob insisted on flying them home in the company jet, even though they'd already booked tickets home. Jerry took that as a very good sign, that he's like, take the company jet home. If you're doing that for somebody, it is like a meeting that goes quite well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it also implies like you're a part of the company, doesn't it? It's like, take the company jet home because you're a part of this now. I like Bob. I want to learn more about Bob. This is going to be a Bob retrospective.
Yeah, Bob Carter, wheeler and dealer.
Yeah.
So they spend pretty much the entire month of September negotiating that deal. As mentioned, the Health South ended up coming out with 5% of stock. Panda ended up owning 51% of the company. Obviously, these deals have not been signed by the time, because, like, imagine, like, that must be torturous. A torturous experience to be like, all right, we're out of money, so we have to spend this entire month negotiating. And it seemed to be a great deal, a great source of frustration for Jerry. That's like, they don't have a hand to play here. Panda have all of the power and all of like the leverage here, because the Jarretts will go bankrupt. Like, it will happen if this deal doesn't happen.
So the whole time he's like, thank God these guys are marks for the business. Because that's the only advantage we have.
That they're willing to actually put money into this thing. It is wild that like they found 2 different investors. That's nearly always where wrestling runs into trouble, like finding actual people willing to put their money where their mouth is. And fair enough, Health South very quickly were like, we're no longer putting our money where our mouth is. But then they found Dixie, like as a stroke of luck through a Jeff Jarrett connection that became stroke. I see what their wordplay. But like a stroke of random luck that this person that he knew from an apartment complex and then hired as his PR manager ended up just being like the source of a great deal of wealth.
It's a good representation of how business really works, isn't it? It's like you can go and do the schooling and do it all. Like, that's never going to be more worthwhile than just knowing the right people and building the right relationships with these people. That's going to get you further than like anything else.
Yeah, any know-how or any ideas. You just have to have enough people willing to give you enough money until it works.
But it's not even like necessarily like, yes, but like it's not even necessarily the money. It's like just knowing the people in the positions who can actually do the stuff, you know? From all levels, not even just, you know, the wrestling business. I think it's really interesting that like, at least at the start with like, and as you can see on the show notes, if you're a Patreon subscriber, how quickly things were happening every day for this company. Like, there was something new going on. It's like, shit, there's a new problem, or there's a new thing, there's a new solution, there's a new discussion. It's just constantly happening. September was a big year for them. Big year, big month. Felt like a year.
And yeah, especially because like they were actively negotiating this deal throughout the entire month. So as I said, there was the September 3 meeting, and then there was all of the details. And then every time they'd have to go back to Health South and be like, well, because Panda were originally like, we'll give them 150K and that's it. And Health South were like, no, they were owed 1.1 million. And eventually the Health South settled for taking 5% of stock instead. But yeah, they're like going back and forth between all of those, going to Panda being like, this is what Health South said, and Panda being like, no, that's not good enough, take this to them instead. And like the Jarretts are just this good like ping pong ball go between these people, trying to sort all this out, trying to get all of the parties that have a financial interest in this company at this stage sorted out and dealt with, so that Panda can actually buy the company and have a controlling interest and not have all these hangers on that they have to deal with. And yeah, it is like fascinating. Jerry's book is a fascinating like a business startup book as much as it is a pro wrestling book, where they're trying to get this thing off the ground and get this thing ready, and it's like written in real time. It's his diary at the time. That's the format of the book, which I think makes it very interesting, because like there's some days where it's just like, September 5th, I had a nice breakfast and had a good rest today. It was a good day. And then some days they're like, we had this horrible day of negotiations. It was the worst day of my life. We went back and forth between Panda and Health South 75 times until we could finally iron out this deal. I am so exhausted, and I still have to write a television show for this week.
And not to mention, like, as I've been like somewhat perusing what's coming up in the rest of the month, and he was dealing with like some terrible bullshit creative the entire time too.
Let's talk about the terrible bullshit creative.
Like, I'm reading this and this is like,
it's the worst.
Some of the worst shit I've ever seen in my fucking life.
All right, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm reading the words of Jerry Jarrett quoting Vince Russo. So please,
yeah,
this is very
direct your hate towards.
So September 13th, you're mentioning, where he's faxed over a couple of pages from the September 18th show from Vince Russo, in which, quote, Russo had a storyline that had Brian Lawler accusing Jeff of raping Brian's girlfriend. The girlfriend then comes out and explains that it was not Jeff and the sex was not rape. A black wrestler, Elix Skipper, then comes out and says it was he that had sex with the girlfriend, and then says something like, once you go black, you never go back. Russo also had Brian and Elix cast as a tag team. That's just like...
It's so clear from like hearing how Jerry is writing about this stuff that he fucking hates Vince Russo.
He does. You'll get better quotes about it in later months.
He cannot stand Russo, and he cannot stand his fucking ideas. This is not the wrestling that one Jerry Jarrett wants to be involved in.
Because there's a whole section after that goes into, they had a clear the air meeting with Russo where they talked about the creative direction and all that after this just utterly horrific idea on so many levels. But
and then he comes back a week later with another fucking great idea.
Vince pitched an idea involving Truth, our NWA champion, and a KKK character. After about 5 minutes of his presentation, I interrupted him to advise that I did not like it and we needed to move on.
Do you think, like, Vince is like, hey, bro, Jeff, your dad's ruining everything. He won't let me have my great ideas.
Vince did that same routine in WCW, or his, like, standards and practices are ruining everything by cutting off shit like this. It's like, you can't just do a wrestling show, can you?
No, you have to, like, oh, God. He's like the epitome of Spike TV, isn't he? Just, what a, like, just a horrid creative mind.
It's just, he's the worst, like, lowest common denominator shock value at all times. That's what this is built on. That's all he knows. And it's like, he can't build interesting characters, even though, like, he's not a bad writer, you know, in terms of, like, skits. He can write, like, decent comedy sometimes, but then he just writes all of this instead, because he has this brain that he apparently can't turn off, and it has to constantly pester him about horrible ideas like the KKK and making light of rape to make weird race jokes.
He reminds me of like one of these like Joe Rogan type stand-up guys.
Mm.
One of these like dude bro stand-up guys. And I wouldn't even compare him to Rogan, to be honest. Even Rogan's got some like decent stuff. I don't even want to talk about Vince Russo, man. He just annoys me.
Well, you're on the wrong podcast then. You're going to have to mention it for a while.
I'll start to become accustomed to it.
Yeah, there's some better Vince Russo burials in later months that I'm excited to get, because as you said, Jerry is still in the phase where he's like, obviously he's just woeful ideas.
Jerry's the only guy that I'm like on the team of. Like, I'm rooting for Jerry Jarrett. He's my hero in this story.
Because there is some quotes in the book where Jerry is just like, it's a shame he didn't learn wrestling from Vince, and Vince didn't teach him how wrestling actually worked.
Yeah. I was just reading the intro where Jerry was talking about his night out on the town with the Carters.
Oh, yeah. He's just had a nice day. Yeah, they took him out for a night in the town. After the September 13th show, they all took him out for a nice day. They drinks and dinner, and they were all happy out.
He went out and partied with Scott Hall and Sean Waltman. Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, and Brian James.
They introduced them to the talent that were like the big stars. So it was Waltman, Hall, BG James, Truth, and Jerry Lynn, who were like the ambassadors for the company as we introduced to the money.
I really like that, like, who do we have that can, like, scrub up and be these perfect representations for the company? And it's like, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, Brian James.
Yep, that's the company these days, though.
But I suppose, like, they would have all probably had some experience in doing this kind of thing, schmoozing the money people, working for the major companies.
They're workers. This is what they do.
Yeah.
They can work.
Well, I tell you right now, who's not there? AJ Styles. Who's not there? Amazing Red. Who's not there? Loki. It's all the workers that are there who have been in the business for 20 plus years.
Who can schmooze somebody.
And you know Jarrett was there too. Jeffrey Jarrett.
Also doing his schmoozing. He is the ultimate schmoozer, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't even know why you needed anyone else there. Just got Jeff there. We all met at, is that Virago's?
Yeah, Virago's, which is apparently a place in Nashville, I guess. Let me Google it.
I wonder let's see if it was a hip party destination.
Virago's is a pioneer of elevated independent restaurants in Nashville. Virago has constantly transformed throughout its 19-year history as the go.
Wow. Do they tout having the Carters and the Jarretts?
The birthplace of NWA-TNA.
Yeah. Integral to the survival of Impact Wrestling.
Yeah, it's closed until 5 a.m, so we can't get delivery. Oh, it's a sushi restaurant.
Oh. Wonder what kind of sushi Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, Brian James, Ron Killings, Jerry Lynn, the Jarretts, and the Carters had.
That's such a strange group of people going for a dinner.
That's my ideal Thanksgiving. Like, I want all of those people.
Especially the Carters.
Yes, well, definitely the Carters. I want to squeeze my way into that family if I can.
Bankroll your wrestling project.
TNA 2.